Welcome to the 2020 meeting of the Energy Charter Independent Accountability Panel. And thank you for the disclosure from APA, which we have read and will discuss. In starting the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. If you haven't met the panel, I'm Claire Petrie, the chair, Cassandra Goldie, the CEO of ACOS, and joining us shortly will be Andrew Richards, the CEO of EUAA. So, Rob, I'm going to pass to you in a moment to make some introductory comments on your disclosure. But just before I do, I want to do what we've done to all CEOs that we've met with, and that's just to acknowledge that this year has been a year like no other. It has been unprecedented in terms of fire, flood, and now the COVID pandemic. And obviously this has had an impact on energy businesses across Australia, and you will probably want to talk about that. But we also want to, if you'd like to highlight any particular things about your disclosure that you want to draw our attention to, especially both positive and negative. So if you're happy to make those introductory remarks, then we can open it up for discussion and questions and for you to introduce your team as well. So over to you, thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you, Cassandra, as well. It's great to be here and thank you for the opportunity to address the panel. Before I introduce myself further and my team, just would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we congregate, but also more importantly where APA operates right across the country. We'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples. My name is Rob Wheals, Chief Executive and Managing Director of APA. With me, I've got Nevenka Codeville, who's our Group Executive of Government and External Affairs, and also importantly, Nevis Madison, who is with us today. Now, Nevis, her daytime job is a manager in the regulatory function at APA, but importantly has played a very important role in project managing our initiatives, which we call our Red Dot initiatives for continuous improvement. We'll touch on that some more. Nevis also participates in the industry working groups and on a number of Better Together initiatives, but also was instrumental in helping us bring our disclosures together. So I just wanted to acknowledge Nevis and her great contribution. It's probably a good place to start just to very briefly overview APA, because that's important in terms of our context and the customers and who we regard as our customers and community. We're a large ASX listed energy infrastructure business, probably best known for the gas transmission pipelines, which we own and operate for some 15,000 kilometres of those around the country. And most of those customers are large industrial mining resources producers or energy retailers. But we also own and operate gas-fired power stations, renewable generation as well, also with large customers off the end of it. But importantly, we also operate gas networks on behalf of AGN, which is owned by AGIG. And through that, we actually touch a lot of smaller customers and residential customers in cities as well as regions. So we have quite a big we touch a lot of parties, both big corporates, but small end of town. If I think about our disclosures, and Claire, you did mention 2020 being a big year, and I won't touch too much on what's been said already in many different forums about the big year, but it's been a big year at APA for possibly another reason as well. I started in the role as Chief Executive Officer at the beginning of the financial year of so 1 July last year, and so that's also the reporting period for which we're talking about. And as any new chief executive coming in wants to look to make some changes, one of the first things we did was to refresh our purpose Our purpose is we strengthen communities through responsible energy, and big focus there on community and obviously responsible energy. We also refreshed our vision, which is to be world-class in energy solutions, and world-class as a number of different focus areas, but one of those is customer focus. So I thought I'd just mention that because those two, both the refreshed purpose and the refreshed vision, certainly have a lot of alignment with what we're trying to achieve through the Energy Charter. The other big thing during the year is we publicly launched something which we've been working on a little while, but which is our customer promise. And quite simply, our customer promise is that we promise to deliver services our customers value. There's elements that sit below that, but that's another area which we launched, and obviously we're then able to start to test our customers on our ability to live up to that. And touching back on, with me starting in the role, we also restructured our business. And it was really a focused around a stronger focus on our customers and how we deliver services, but also particularly in Nevenka's area, in government and in external affairs, a bigger focus on community and sustainability. So those two areas. And so whilst those changes are designed to bring more positive change in the future, they also meant that when you've got a business going through a reorganisation, you do have some distraction, and it did mean that we didn't quite deliver on all of the disclosures or commitments we'd made in the prior year, and I'll touch on that in a minute. Just very briefly about financially in 19, our disclosures were quite comprehensive, and so financially in 20, or this last period, was more about what have we done and achieved, what did we deliver, what did we part deliver, and in some cases, what did we not deliver? And as I said, there were challenges during the year, not only COVID and bushfires, but also the organisational changes. But I'm certainly very proud of what we did achieve, and very proud of our people managing to deliver what we did deliver in what has been a difficult year. In terms, the disclosures were very much around a very simple traffic light system. Did we achieve something? Did we not achieve something? And did we partially achieve it? And what was the benefit to the customer, the community? And our disclosures also took into account findings from the panel from our last disclosures, and those of others, took account of looking at what our peers were doing. So there's some useful value in the benchmarking we can do, and also gave a pretty honest assessment, I think, again, where we are in terms of the maturity model, which had been developed by the Charter. There's lots of detail in the disclosures, which I won't go through now, but if I mention perhaps the top three things that I think I'm most proud of, but also the things that we probably need to work the most on as well going forward, just to highlight a few. I think our survey and getting feedback, we made some good progress in that regard, both extending the surveys beyond our top 20 customers in our transmission business, and have also started to roll out surveys to our power customers, which we hadn't done in a more formalised sense in the past. And we also introduced a more formalised complaints process. So getting feedback was important, and so we made some good steps forward in that regard. We made some good steps forward in terms of stakeholder engagement, particularly with our regulatory processes. We've got some more work to do beyond that. And I'm also particularly proud of some of the response that we provided, not just for our own people, but also for our customers and community in relation to what happened around bushfires and COVID. Areas for improvement, there's always lots. And there's particularly when we I think we gave a pretty honest assessment as to where we are today. So that leaves us lots of scope for improvement. I think the thing that rises to the top for me is a more consistent and broad application of KPIs in the business with the customer focus. We got some of the way through that in this past year. We didn't successfully cascade that as deep as what I would have liked, and a lot of that is due to our own organisational restructures and the distraction that flows from that. More work in stakeholder engagement and community, and then just continued focus on our customer, what we call our customer journey. So if we think of a customer's engagement with us all the way from order through to the bill, the different touch points along the way, and getting feedback along that customer journey to improve the experience along the way. So that's most certainly an area we can continue to focus. I think there's always room for more improvement. I might just leave it there, Claire.
That's fine. Thank you, Rob. Before I throw to Andrew and Cassandra, could I just ask you, you said that your new vision is we strengthen communities. To quote a customer advocate that I spoke to recently, actions are more important than words. And so what does that actually mean?
Look, I think it actually means a lot in many respects, and we've described what it means to us. But to give you a couple of examples, and Claire, I think you're absolutely right. It does come to actions. You've got to live up to what you say you're going to do. There's probably two parts to it in very simplistic sense. We build infrastructure and own and operate it for a long time in communities. And so the first part is when we go into communities to develop projects, it's about making a positive, lasting difference, not a one-off impact. It's about recognizing that asset is going to impact upon that community for 10 or 20 or 30 or many decades. And so it's that recognition of that and how we engage with the community for the benefit of the community for the longer term. And that's to be separated from the actual generation of the energy itself, which might have benefit for the community. So it's all about, we could talk about it for quite some time, but that's really the essence of it, is the recognition that what we do can either have a very positive impact or a negative impact. And so it's how we engage right from day one all the way through. If you think about the infrastructure and the landowners that we engage with over many decades, those are long-term relationships, but it all comes down to how they were established at the start and how they get maintained over time.
And in your introduction, you acknowledged traditional owners of the land. Is that a particular focus or just part of that engagement with the communities where you have an impact?
It's always has been a focus, but part of what we are recognizing is it needs to be a bigger focus. So, I think it was recognizing that developing projects and going through processes, recognizing heritage is more than a process. It's a recognition of the custodians of the land and what's important to them as part of as much as what the development might be able to add to the community.
All right. Well, look, I've got some further questions, but I'll pass to Andrew in the first place now that he's joined us. Thank you, Andrew. Glad you're here.
Sorry about that, Houston. We had a communication problem. But
Good day, Andrew. How are you?
Hi, Rob. Good to see you again. Hi, Nevenka and Noves. How are you? Can I just start by saying I really enjoyed reading your disclosure. The honest assessment on the framework, I think, is really refreshing. So congratulations on that. Clearly, you're making some headway on some areas, but also be prepared to put your hand up to say, well, we haven't got there on the other things, and we've had a hell of a year, so perhaps not unsurprising. And we're obviously engaging in your customer reference group as well. So actually seeing, sort of outside of this submission, a whole range of areas where you're actually stepping out. So congratulations on that. So you're clearly working pretty hard to try and instill this new culture inside the business. But a business like yours has a lot of third parties working for it and with it, whether it be partners or subcontractors or whatever. So is part of the next step, or one of the next steps, rolling out the principles of the charter to all those third parties that you deal with on a daily basis to make sure that end-to-end we're improving the custom process?
Andrew, the simple answer is yes, and maybe the analogy I'd give is in the safety space. We do a lot of work with contractors, but ultimately when we measure safety, we measure the safety of our people and those of our contractors, and we're ultimately responsible for their safety. I see this as really no different, that if we're trying to get good customer outcomes and we are reliant on employees and we're reliant on third parties that do work for us, that we've got to get the same level of focus and it does become somewhat harder, there's no doubt, as we have experience in the safety space, and that trying to get outcomes in that alignment is always a little bit more tricky once removed, but it's also not an excuse.
So some have talked about even not so much putting it in part of the contract, but certainly bringing some of those principles of the spirit through. Are you going to that step as well, as sort of entering into those agreements?
Well, I think, in many instances it can be talked about in a number of different ways. One is in the principles of, or the spirit of what you're trying to achieve can be captured in the form of a contract, but there can also be let's call it performance metrics that become part of the performance of the contract. So there's different ways, and then obviously there's you can put in place incentive mechanisms where there's where that becomes more visible and possibly financially impactful.
The other question that it's my role to ask, it's quite a big one. It's around net zero emissions by 2050 and the whole transition of the energy space, and particularly a company like yours that has a lot of steel on the ground, that's still got a lot of asset life left in it, but net zero emissions may mean that we're shunting less gas around potentially, and potential for stranded asset is one sort of risk area. So how, in your mind, have you started to think about how we move to net zero by 2050 in the transition? Because those investment decisions are being made today, and how we do that without blowing up customer bills or not allocating risk correctly and creating more vulnerability within customer space?
It certainly is a big question. Look, it's top of mind, I think, for every business right now, no matter what part of the no matter what part of the energy value chain you might be, or no matter what part of the industry segment you're at, that's becoming a bigger and bigger focus. When I think about it, Andrew, in terms of existing infrastructure, and I'm thinking in that respect, existing pipeline infrastructure, we've just done some detailed work and published it with what's called our climate resilience report, which looks at different scenarios. It looks at a 4-degree, a 2 to 3 degree, and a 1.5 degree scenario over the next 3 decades, and uses third-party validated different scenarios. They're not predictions of the future, but they are scenarios. And then we've stress tested our business under those 3 scenarios. And clearly, the 1.5 degree scenario, which is getting close to that net zero, does have a more impactful impact on the business. But on our assessment, from what we can tell, the value of the assets is still intact. Clearly, the opposite is also true in a 4-degree scenario, and we're not suggesting that's going to be an outcome. So I think the short answer is we've done that assessment, and we'll have to continue doing that assessment on an ongoing basis, because the energy transition is exactly that. It's a transition, and for a fair transition for end consumers, we need to see that happen in a way in which emissions are reduced, but reliability is maintained and cost doesn't become an issue that distresses the end user. The other side of it is when we think about new infrastructure, whatever that new infrastructure might be, and I'm not going to presuppose different technologies because there will be a mix, taking account of those 3 scenarios as part of the assessment in investment is important. So, if let's say a new gas pipeline being proposed, we would think about it differently today than we might have thought about it yesterday, in terms of how long, what is the available supply, and what is the likely use of that asset over the longer term, given the energy transition. And that then comes back into economics and whether it can be justified.
I have to have a look at the climate resilience report, because obviously for gas pipelines particularly, it's an issue that's coming up pretty quickly. So you talked about stress testing the business, but does that include the stress on customers? Does that include what it actually means to the customer base downstream by way of price or risk? So I can understand the stress testing the business, but stress testing the customer outcome. Does that work also part of that?
It implicitly is, Andrew, in the sense that what we haven't assumed, so let me describe what we haven't assumed in that stress testing of our assets and the economic value of the assets. We haven't assumed that if volume half, then price doubles. We've assumed that price gets maintained, but volume has become less. So it does have a negative impact on revenue and value over time. But you know, that's a simple explanation, but I think to suggest that customers would use less energy and therefore the price would double in my example is not, you know, is not the way we're thinking about things.
That's good to know, because that's exactly what I was thinking about with the revenue cap arrangements and those sorts of things in regulated networks, whether the similar kind of thing would flow through to you. So that's positive. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You know, the majority of our assets are not regulated assets in that sense. And so there is a different equation potentially that might play out in a regulated model, but we haven't cast our mind to that.
So in your case then particularly, you're far more exposed to market forces than a regulated asset.
Well, I think a regulated assets are low risk assets is probably the short answer.
Hopeful of hydrogen?
I'm sorry?
Are you hopeful that hydrogen fills the gap, and whether you can put it in transmission pipes or is another question, I suppose.
Well, I think it's one of the many potential future energy sources. Its biggest challenge is the economics. It's a well-proven technology. The technology is not in dispute. It's more, can it be produced on a level that is economic, and can it be transported in a way which is safe? But that's, you know, I think there's a lot of talk about hydrogen at the moment, and it is exciting, but at the same time, there's lots of other technologies that could be exciting. And I think the important thing for all of us in the energy space is to keep an open mind, not to pick a winner, and the market will ultimately decide that. But I think exploring those sorts of things like hydrogen and giving it some space to develop is important. And we saw that with solar, with more investment, more research and development, and costs have come down.
Okay. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Andrew. Cassandra.
Thanks, and good to see you again, Rob. And hello, everybody. Welcome to Friday afternoon. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see what happens on Sunday for people in Victoria. So I'm just look. I wanted to also just go to the area of the COVID-19 response that you articulated in your disclosure, and you talked there about the value of being in the Better Together COVID response process. And the sort of understanding about the customer distress, and then what role you need to play in responding to that. I'm very keen for you to give us a sense of how specific you've been about the assessment of the risk, what you're seeing on the horizon, and do you consider that you have put in place the plans you might need to respond to growing distress on the customer side, depending on what happens on the economy? Thanks, Rob.
Thanks. That's quite a lot in that question. I'll see if I can try and do it justice. You're absolutely right. You know, the COVID did and continues to have a significant impact and I think to a large extent has been shielded by the government's response at the moment. I think until, you know, I still don't think we've seen the full effect of distress flow through. But maybe just if I can just talk a little bit about what we've done and what we've learned through the process, and then try and address, you know, sort of more of a look forward. I think what's been quite interesting, you know, putting aside all what we've had to do internally in the business, which has really been around keeping our people safe so they can continue to provide an essential service and keep the lights on, if you like. So that's been our focus. What working together in the Energy Charter has been helpful, because we've one of the initiatives we put together, which I think possibly we might not have otherwise, and it certainly changes the lens at which you look through things, is to engage directly with, as an example, all our industrial customers, and talk to them on an ongoing basis about the stress that they might be going through, and how we may be able to support them. And what has flowed from that in a number of instances is more flexible payment terms or service terms, so adjustment to their current terms and conditions to support them through a particular period where they were going through some stress. The other area, of course, is that we operate gas networks on behalf of AGN, and through that we've complied with the AER's directive of how to look after and support in smaller customers, in particular residential customers, through the COVID process, and that goes so far as not disconnecting if people aren't being able to pay their bills, etc. So that's been a matter of course through that process. I think on a look forward basis, our focus is most simply going to have to be to continue to engage regularly with our customer base, no matter whether they're big or small, to understand where they're at. As I said at my opening comment there, that when the pandemic first hit, there was a flurry of activity to try and understand what the pain points were, and things somewhat, dare I say, settled down a little bit, but that's more because people have become more accustomed with the current environment. But we're sitting here in October, and this is not over by any stretch. So our focus will be to continue to engage, talk to our customers, and see where we may be able to support them where they're going through times of stress.
Just on that, we've been seeing which of the signatories have done any work on sort of data analytics about predictive areas of greatest risk and distress for the customer base. So Rob, going beyond, the direct engagement, because depending on, which part of the segment of the customer base, that just won't be feasible, in terms of really getting on top of what could be quite large scale. So just anything you want to add on to that in terms of, the predictive work you're doing and any data analytics associated with that?
Cassandra, given the nature of our customer base, which for our transmission pipelines power is largely limited to a smaller number of larger customers, it can be done on a more direct basis. But you do raise an interesting point that whilst we provide an operating service to networks businesses who ultimately provide a network service to a retailer, who ultimately provide energy to an end consumer, there's value in thinking about that as an end-to-end across through one of the Better Together initiatives, possibly in the Energy Charter, because ultimately there's somebody at the end who's getting a bill and may or may not be able to pay that bill.
Yeah, this is some of what we're interrogating a little bit, Rob, over this. We are in a new environment at a sort of a wide community level, and I think in the Better Together work and in this charter work, spreading everybody's efforts too thinly at the moment is the last thing we want to do. We really want to hone in on where we think the most important shared focus is going to be. So, well,
I think spreading thin, but also run the risk of is always duplicating effort or potentially missing out something. So I think you raise a very valid point.
Yeah. Just can I just touch on you flagged up the area of social performance and the intention there had been also to have a more active employment program. Can you give a little bit more detail about what you are planning there? Neither of that has actually commenced. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, these are areas which we would put up our hand and say we've got lots of work to do, and the focus is a number of different areas there. But first and foremost, that is an area which will be led by, and I think Nevenka's still with us somewhere in her area, focusing on how we can engage with our community on those sorts of areas, and and it goes beyond the service that we provide directly to the end consumer, but how we support communities more broadly. We've got what we call our Brighter Futures program, which is all about supporting community, but that's going to be refreshed, consistent with our refreshed purpose and vision as well. So it's an area that we've, through this through our disclosures, have put up our own hand to say we need to do more in that space.
Just again, in terms of focus and effort, of course, there's been a number of initiatives around the employment area flagged in this post-COVID or living with COVID environment. And so again, as a employer, there is a really significant opportunity there, I think, to demonstrate some leadership around opening up employment opportunities as appropriate. So that's just something that I would encourage you to look at.
And I think particularly also, those opportunities often come about when there's a new project in a regional area and supporting local jobs. And I think that unless there's jobs being created in some of the metro areas, I think the real opportunity is those new projects as they come along, and if you like, employing local to the extent that's possible, including creating roles and opportunities for Aboriginal peoples.
And so in general terms, with the social performance area, in 12 months' time, where would you like to be?
Well, very simply put, not at what do we call ourselves, elementary in that space. So we've got to be, the next step up from that, Cassandra. That's got to be the goal.
So the plan is not quite there either at the moment of where you want to get to.
No, we haven't probably very clearly articulated what good looks like, both in the 3 to 5 year time frame, but also in the 12 months time frame.
So Rob, would it be helpful if I added added something in this regard? So Cassandra, the sustainability and community function was really newly established in May and now sits with me. So General Manager was appointed at that time, and there is a priority. We're in the market currently for a community social performance manager that would actually take the lead in developing the plan. We have bold ambitions about what we want to do, but we need to get the resourcing in place to do it. So in answer to your question, where would I want to see us at the end of the financial year? Definitely with an articulated plan of what we want to achieve over what time frame, and have set up at least the internal governance arrangements to make that happen.
Thanks. And just one last one, Claire, just going back onto your the customer survey work, I think that you talked about, Rob, at the earlier stage. Let me just check here. Just this sort of on the customer promise. So under principle 1 of the disclosure, where you've got you're sort of kind of satisfied with the high level findings, but then there's 52% saying, do we respond to your needs? And
yeah, I'm very happy to comment on that. So the customer promise, as I said, well, actually taking it a step back, what we didn't want to do in financial year 20 for particularly our transmission customers is go and ask them all the same questions again, particularly during a difficult time, and you run the risk of survey fatigue. So the focus in financial year 20 for the customers that we had surveyed in 19 was to start to test how we were living up to the key elements in our customer promise. And sitting below the promise, so the promise is we promise to deliver services you value. And the elements below that is that we will listen to understand, we will enable our people to respond, and we'll do what we say we'll do. And so the focus of the survey was to go and test those 3 elements in a number of different ways, with different, more probing questions. And as you rightly point out in the disclosures, we did quite well in some areas, but the 2 areas that we didn't do well in was responding, so responsiveness, and in particular, from what we could tell, responsiveness in relation to issue resolution. So if an issue had been raised, was it being addressed quickly enough and responded to? And the other was in communication, particularly in more proactive communication. So, simple example, if we were going to need to do maintenance works on our assets that might impact on supply for a particular period, the contract might lay out a very simple process to do that, but actually more information communicated more regularly that helps our customers better manage those outcomes, it would be well regarded. So, for example, one of the responses to that's been to, before the start of the winter, was to get the major customers together and talk about all our winter, what the winter plans were and how that might impact them. So that's just touching on two things, but I think very important, very simply, there were two areas that we certainly recognise based on that feedback, and feedback is the way you get better. And that was around responsiveness and our communications.
Thanks, Rob and Venkat. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you.
Rob, we're pleased to see the prominence of the Charter on your website, but it is about embedding the principles of the Charter in the company from the top to the bottom and all through the business. We're looking for some best practice examples of real embedding of that, the principles of the culture in the organisation from board level, particularly at the board level. Would you like to claim that title at the moment? And but seriously, we would like to know how your board and senior management really are trying to live up to the principles and embed them in the daily focus of the board and the executive.
Yeah, look, thank you, Claire. I'm not. I'd take a more humble approach and not want to put up my hand in and claim that we're the best at this. We've got, I think our own rating of where we're at on this journey is probably more reflective of our thinking. But maybe just point to some of the things that we have been doing that I think are pointing us in the right direction. We just need to do more of it. We start every board meeting with a customer share, for example. Our board is now regularly looking for updates on feedback from our customers, having introduced the surveys. They want to see the results of the surveys. They want to see what, because we've introduced a more formalised complaints process, they want to have visibility of what those complaints were and how we're resolving them. So that's happening because that conversation's happening at the board level. We always start my executive leadership team meetings with customer shares as much as safety shares. And so that's starting to cascade through the organisation. I did flag earlier that the cascading of customer-focused KPIs, we didn't achieve a very as consistent approach to that in this last disclosure period. But I'm pleased that in the cascading of those KPIs to my direct reports for this year, everybody's got it. And my expectation is that'll be cascaded deeper into the organisation as well. So those are other ways that get the conversation happening, if you like.
Thank you. And just to turn it back onto you for a moment, what would be a couple of high-level things that you would like to see or expect to see in our report this year? Having a very detailed report last year, obviously we've tried to focus both the businesses. We've tried to focus the businesses this year, and we hope to focus as well. So what are a couple of things that you would like to see from your point of view?
I think the two things that sort of float to my mind, Claire, is we've all got lots of really good ideas to do more things, but I think we can all do better if we do fewer things well. So that's a principle that I think as an industry we can. It's always hard to do, and we always struggle with that in the workplace. We're always adding more things. I think it's about getting them really focused and saying, well, if it's really important enough, let it be a top priority. But then the second part to that is making sure that we resource things properly. And I think that is something I'd like to see probably emphasised. I think if this is important, which it is, then it needs to be integrated in the work that we do within our own individual organisations, as much as it's been done as part of the Energy Charter, and then we need to resource it appropriately. And if we're asking people to bolt it onto their day jobs, it does become hard. So I think if we want to get good outcomes, if it's important, the emphasis has got to be in resourcing it. which is always, it is a challenge, but if it's important, then it needs to get the resource.
Thank you. Look, we're fast running out of time, so I'm going to check. Cassandra or Andrew, do you have any other questions?
No, really, just once again, Rob, just want to call out the fact that you've been really, really transparent and honest around where you're not doing well. I think that the comment then, don't just bolt it onto your day job, I think is really compelling. I think where we're seeing some probably improvements of people really taking seriously is they are actually putting the resources in place and they're dedicated, and there's metrics and there's tracking and there's reporting right up to the board. So there's sort of, I guess, the early signals that it's been taken seriously and that we're likely to see a rapid improvement.
Or, to say what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets resources. So, yeah.
Any last word from you, Rob?
No, just thank you very much. I think this is a useful. Certainly, we're very supportive as one of the founder members of the Energy Charter, very supportive of the process, and I think this exercise of sort of really being honest with where you're at, but then this conversation is valuable as well. And I think as we talked about some time ago, it's all about getting better together.
That's great. That's a great place to end. So thank you very much, all of you, for your time. And we'll next talk when we finalise our report.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all. Thank you.
Thanks.
Guys.